Welcome to the Jungian Anthology Podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Healing Cinema, Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Dan and Judith are going to introduce the film, so I don't need to say anything else about that, and their bios are available in the show notes or previous episodes. I do want to say that we've had a longtime staff member, Danielle McMahon Griffin, leave the Institute in January, so we'll miss her, of course, and in the meantime, we're just a little busy around here, so I'm trying my best to get back to our twice-a-month schedule of episodes, so we'll see. Hopefully I can do that, and if not, if it ends up being once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, sorry about that, and I just appreciate your patience. I just want to say also, during this episode, Dan and Judith talk about Mark Sabin's book, Two Souls Alas, Carl Jung's Two Personalities and the Making of Analytical Psychology. And we have an interview with Mark from December, so if you want to learn more about that, you can just go ahead and look at that episode. Okay, so now let's jump right in.
Now, I want to start off by saying to this audience that perhaps unlike our other films, whether they have seen it or not, they may benefit from the podcast. And because I've talked to people, about my ideas about it, and they said, well, they may even have seen it and not really taken it in, right? And then after we talk about it, they get excited about going back to it and seeing it from a different perspective. So, whether the audience has seen it, this movie Birdman by a wonderful director, Inarritu, or not, I think, this will be an opportunity for them to see it from a different perspective.
Right. Not only a different perspective, hopefully, that they'll learn something, but also a depth perspective. It is amazing, isn't it? Dan, you and I have talked about this, that multiple viewings just open things up and are talking about it with each other. Up till this morning, I would say, knowing that we were going to record today, I have thought of different things, and it's the gift that keeps on giving.
It really does.
It's like a classical piece of literature. It just, as having presented on this film a few years ago on trauma, I missed completely this other way of looking at it that I've come to, that I hope we get to talk about, which is more the wounding of the masculine in patriarchy. So that I agree. It just, if the love is there, to continue to see it and think about it, it is astounding to me.
I think what you said about the depth, I think, is so important. We tend to get in the film industry, in our country in particular, I think we get inundated with, I think what Inarritu was trying to get at is that too many films where you don't have to work, you don't have to go in depth, you just, you see it and you go home and oh, that was pretty, or that was exciting, or that was, but there's no depth to it. It doesn't draw you into it, right?
Right.
He is, and I heard an interview about it. He with the interviewer said that, in the interviews made the comment, are you talking about artsy films or something like that? And he says he hates that. He says these films are about life. If you categorize it as art, you're moving away from the grit and the blood and the earthiness of a film, right? Films should be about life. If they're not about life, then it's not going to feed you. It's not going to nourish you.
Right. And that is a point of what the film is about in terms of film versus theater, highbrow, lowbrow.
Yeah.
Speak to the masses, or that's a judgment right there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
My part. the lowest common denominator. I mean, most people, I would say, maybe this is my prejudice, but most people go to films to be entertained and, like you said, to get a thrill, instead of the way John Beebe talks about looking at a film, which is film as active imagination, and having your own complexes get triggered by watching a film. The viewer is part of the film experience, just like a reader is part of reading a book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and it's just along the point, the multiple times I've seen it, and the deeper I got into it, the more I could feel it, which is very interesting. There are parts that I just laughed out loud for minutes that I didn't laugh the first time I saw it. I mean, it's a comedy, right?
Yes, it is.
But there's also a scene that I was in tears. And I'll comment on that when we get to those scenes.
Good. I want to hear about that. Yeah.
But the range of emotion that over time and over multiple viewings, I was able to really feel this film and fall in love with it.
Yeah, but isn't that a parallel to Regan's character?
It really
is. He becomes more related, more connected, more feeling.
Yeah.
He's able to grieve. Well, we're jumping ahead, but that is absolutely the parallel to the film. So that's so beautiful to hear as a man. You say, but as a woman, I could absolutely know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Good. So do you want to go through your summary?
Yeah. Good. Here's the summary of the film. By the way, this film, for our audience, as they may know, it won 4 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Cinematography. And there were other nominations: Michael Keaton for Best Actor, Edward Norton for Best Supporting Actor nominee, and also another Best Supporting Actress, Emma Stone, who plays the daughter. So the summary is a washed-up, aging film actor, who once played in an iconic superhero in a comic book franchise series of blockbuster that was made into blockbuster films, struggles with titanic doubts and insecurities. It drives the film, doesn't it? In attempts to recover, I would say, his self-respect, his family, his career, himself, almost like a form of redemption that drives the film. In the days leading up to the opening of his stage adaptation on Broadway of the Raymond Carver short story, What Do We Talk About When We Talk About Love? I feel like crying one right now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's dealing with absolutely core human values.
Yeah.
And the fact that it opens up with this epigraph from another, like, you knew this poem, it's called A Late Fragment by Raymond Carver.
Yeah.
And he has these absolutely gorgeous lines on the screen as an epigraph. And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so. And the answer is, I did. And the other voice says, and what did you want? And the voice and the words are, to call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth.
That is so powerful.
Oh my God.
Now, I fell in love with Raymond Carver years ago. His short stories and then his poetry. And I was aware at some point that he had cancer. And I knew he was publishing a book of short stories. And then after he died, then I went back and read some articles, or somebody was interviewed about him, and he had written that was a poem, and he had written that just before he died, and it was one of his last entries.
Wow. You know what that makes me think of? This is kind of off the topic a bit, but during 9/11 in the towers, people were calling home and just saying, I love you to people, knowing that you might die.
Yeah.
many of them did. So yeah, I think we get, well, it's a real commentary, isn't it, on our culture that we get caught in over consumerism and all that other BS, and overlook the core value of love. And that's what this film, I think, is ultimately about.
Yeah.
So one of the first images we see is of a meteor.
Now that's my take on it. Which is interesting because I read a review and they said they thought it was a rocket or something like that, and I said that was not my. Now I had seen that image I told you at the beginning of The Revenant, his subsequent film.
Yes.
It made so much sense to me that it was be a meteor that was crashing down to the earth, because it's emotionally what Regan is doing in this story, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, I found an interview too, where Inarritu says it's a meteor, and
he does. Okay.
Yeah, and he's asked about it, and he says he doesn't know how he came up with it. He said that it's interesting that he's used it in another film too, right? He said for him it was, quote, an image of an inarticulate feeling, and to me that gets at what Jung says about images, that they hold feelings.
Yes.
And when during his confrontation with the unconscious, where he says in MDR, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he says that it was important for him to get the image behind the feelings so that he could contain the feeling. So I thought that was an interesting, Inarritu way of putting it, because it does kind of echo what Jung is saying. And also we see the meteor at the end of the film too. So it's an important image.
He bookends the film with several things, but that image, it's interesting. The other way of looking at it too is what Jung means by a symbol, and the symbol as a living image that has an unconscious component to it that grabs us because it desires consciousness, right? It desires to come to consciousness. It's so, and that's so Inarritu, right? That he's putting himself out there in such a way because something is pulling at him that he doesn't know what it is, and he leaves it up to the audience to help do the work of it in some ways. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That we can hold these images and let it sit with us.
That's right. Again, that you're saying what I was saying earlier, that we each bring our own stuff, our own issues, our own complexes too. I mean, your feeling about a meteor might be different than mine enough, but I like the way you said that about the symbol, that it desires consciousness. That's beautiful. I think that's right. And so we struggle with it, right? We struggle to find it.
We got to struggle with it. Yeah. There's another image, right after that.
Yeah, the jellyfish.
The jellyfish. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast.
It is. It's a real interesting pair of opposites. Yeah. Because the meteor is in space, in the sky. Jellyfish are in the ocean.
Yeah.
These were beached jellyfish too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so they look really large. They look huge, and not very colorful. What you think of a jellyfish look like in the ocean, but very interesting.
But they're dead. I think that's interesting. They're dead. They're beached. They're which is almost, it feels like a companion image to the meteor, which is on fire, right? This is something else. I don't know. Maybe as we go through this.
I think we'll get there.
Okay.
Because how it ends, with the same images and him talking about the jellyfish when he tried to kill himself. That scene at the end with his wife.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So the opening scene after the images is Regan.
I wanted to throw out there right from the start. I looked up Regan and the image or the etymology. It means little king.
Oh, does it? I was hoping you would do the etymology thing with the name because
I did.
Wow.
I was like, that blew me away. That is perfect for this film.
Perfect. Inaritu doesn't know how psychological he is.
Oh my goodness. Whoever came up with that, it's brilliant because it's a paradox, right? It's a paradox. And we're talking about a lot of.
Yeah, it's like when Cowshed talks about the king baby, the whole king baby, which is all through this film of that combination of innocence and inflation. Yes. And so the fact that it's Little King, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, and the first image we come to, I mean, past the jellyfish and the first image of Regan is him sitting there, elevated, right, in a lotus position in his underwear. And apparently, Inarritu said that that's the first image he had of the film.
Oh, wow.
Before the rest of it was fleshed out. That's the image.
Wow. That's just I got the goosebumps to think that it starts with that,
Yeah.
And we see his back, which I think is important because there's so much shadow there. Right? That the voice that's the Batman's voice is the first voice we hear, internal voice of Regan. And but yes, the combination of elevation, levitation, and exposure, vulnerability. He's in his underwear.
It's so interesting. So throughout this film, this what I call the highest and the lowest, which is very alchemical, is in the same space, but not integrated, right? It's like it's in the same space, but it's not yet integrated. And I think the rest of the film is this integration of or bringing closer together this higher version of him and this lower version of him, right?
Yes. I mean, maybe we could say that there's a splitting there, right? There's a splitting between the two.
Yes.
But I like your alchemical take on it. Yeah, he's got this voice that drives him crazy. We learn, is constantly like at him about, what are we doing here? Get out of this place. It smells like balls. I mean, it's very vulgar, but it captures the almost, I don't know. I mean, as it unfolds, we see the violence in the voice, the violence.
Yes.
I read an interview with Inarritu where he says at some point, all of us have our own Birdman. Once you discover or become more conscious of your Birdman, excuse the language, he says he's fucked, meaning Birdman is fucked. He's just a naked little bird. I try to keep him in a cage.
I love that.
Isn't that great? But
I love that.
I mean, you and I would agree that everyone in some way has their own version of that. It's the inner predator, it's the inner critic, it's the inner persecutor.
Yes.
That Cowshed talks about. I think it's more difficult, than Inarritu is intimating to. It's not enough to keep him in a cage.
Yes.
I think we have to work at identifying it and not necessarily integrating all of it because it's at the archetypal level, but it's work. It's constant work to keep them in that cage.
Yeah, this is interesting to think about. What comes to me is that, first of all, there's the progression or trajectory that the character starts out as a voice, that the personality starts as a voice, and I'm just coming off of a book that I read that I love. It's called Two Souls Alas. It's by Mark Sabin, and it's about Jung's two personalities. And one of his premises is that Jung's genius was that the personification of our inner personalities, the personification, and how he did that in active imagination, it provides the tension of the opposites and the idea of the transcendent function, and the movement to a different level of consciousness. But so in the film, he goes from a voice, and then at precise moments, now the Birdman is, now you could see him like he's now become this slowly personified.
Right. That's significant. That is I agree. That's a very significant moment when we actually see Birdman. He's not just a poster on the wall. The dressing room. We see him at the point of a really important point in the film where he's either going to, we'll get there. We'll get there. Right. It's really important. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in another interview, and this follows up on your quote, he said to an interviewer who was asking him about this film came out of a period of creative frustration because he had just finished four films, and he found himself depleted, and there was a very difficult time for him. So this particular film, it was more personal. Right? It reflected his personal confrontation. This is what he says. Inside me, there's a chronically unsatisfied guy who is always telling me that nothing is ever good enough. I finally got to the point where I just said to this guy, who the fuck are you to tell me this is wrong? This is all that I can do.
Oh, wow.
He says, it took years of meditation to recognize who this internal dictator was. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I thought, this has the makings of a movie. Isn't that something?
Yes. So along those lines, we'll get back to the film, but along those lines, I just read something too, Dan, in another context, but there was the naming of this something that I think is very relevant here. An analyst calls what the artist needs as adaptive grandiosity. Adaptive grandiosity. I
like that.
We need that to create.
Yes.
If we don't think that that what we're doing is important as an artist or as any kind of artist, you can't create, because of what Inarritu is saying, that there is this part that is telling us we're not good enough. So inflation, the film is all about inflation and humiliation. And so, but this idea that for a time, or the recognition maybe, that inflation can be adaptive. You can very easily turn maladaptive.
Yes.
Into this inner dictator who says, we're not good enough. But in those moments, we try to have adaptive grandiosity.
I really like that.
Isn't that great?
Because where I was thinking, the progression of the story, he becomes Birdman, right? He resists, he represses, he's trying to shut him up. Mm-hmm. And then, as he descends deeper into his own humiliation because of all the things that are going on, then he becomes Birdman for that time period, right?
You mean he can say bye-bye to Birdman?
Well, I mean, when he's flying around and, so I'm equating that to, or it's flying around in the film, and there's enough reality to keep the audience grounded into what's really going on. But in his mind, he's, causing all these things to occur, right?
Oh, right.
That, I think that goes along with the adaptive grandiosity. This is adaptive. It's not like he's psychotic and and they take him away.
No.
He is going through this identification with this person to get through him, right?
Right. But in those, we can talk about it as we go through the film, because I would say in those moments when he's flying, he's escaping.
Mm-hmm.
He's working it through still. He's not there yet. right?
Yeah,
I mean, I would argue that he's not quite there yet. I think that he's looking for the grand gesture, as he says on the roof.
Yeah.
And maybe at that point he has decided to attempt suicide, just like in the scene in the play. But we'll get there.
But I think it speaks to the idea of adaptive meaning. Is it an escape? Yes, but it's also a compensation to the level of humiliation, right? The deeper he goes into his humiliation, the more he moves into this. It's very interesting, the timing of things. Every time when his daughter, lambates him, then he goes and he's moving the that dish or whatever that was. He's moving that dish. It's like these telepathic powers start to emerge when he's most ashamed or most humiliated, or that's starting to come up.
Right. Because I would say, don't you think that he's identified more with the archetype in that moment?
Yes.
So he's King Baby right there, because he thinks he's got all these powers that.
Yeah. But isn't that the artist? Isn't that what that adaptive grandiosity is? The artist has to carry that God image, right, to create,
right, but
not identify with,
not over identify. Where's that line? Where's that line? Because we know of all the artists that thought they needed to drink or take drugs to create. So, well, let's go back to Regan in his underwear.
Yeah.
This little king.
Then he goes he hears the phone, or his daughter's phone on Skyping him, and she's at the she's trying to get flowers from him. These flowers, there's a wonderful image, right? Because that two bookends.
Yes.
The beginning and the end. And it's interesting. The flowers that he wants are alchemillas,
alchemillas,
which is very alchemical.
Yeah.
Right. The alchemillas, the literal translation is lady's mantle, and it's the alchemist said that the moisture from the plant that emerges they called moon water. It was and the mantle protects the elixir as if it was in her womb.
Oh my gosh, one feminine image after another.
Isn't that lovely? And the moon water was needed for the philosopher's stone. It's just wonderful.
Well, that almost, to me, that's beautiful. Thank you for looking all that up. It's just gorgeous imagery. To me, that validates almost the importance of the daughter in this film as an anima figure that is a thread through the whole film, and that's what he's working toward. That's what and that's the point where he gets to.
Yes.
Feeling, and the two of them, of course, get there, but also within himself. Oh, that is beautiful imagery.
And she, of course, doesn't get it.
She's furious. She's carrying a lot of anger in this opening scene, isn't she?
Yeah.
Oh my! She's just rageful.
Yeah. She hates the job. She hates it. Yeah. She's it's so interesting. And of course, what she brings back are what he hates, roses. And I don't know what to make of that, but the theme of him hating roses goes all the way through to the end, I think, of the film as well, because it's mentioned throughout, right?
Oh, I didn't catch that, but I would say that the rose, I think that's Aphrodite's flower. So, that's interesting.
That's interesting. He may just hate it because that's what that usually gets. Like at the end, the room was filled with roses, right? And he just, in theater they get roses all the time, right?
Yes. Huh. But there is a real I would say a real anima progression here with his development of his feeling function and his ability to connect.
I agree.
Yeah. What can we say? Can we comment on the drums throughout the film? That the music to this film was wonderful. The drum solo that just set a pace that, and then of course the Rachmaninoff where he's soaring to that, I love.
Yeah.
But and also the shots of hallways. I thought that was, they're backstage in hallways. I came upon a review, Dan, that linked that to the Labyrinth of King Minos.
Oh wow!
Icarus, isn't that interesting? I would have never thought that, but the labyrinth of hallways in the back.
Yes. That is so interesting, and the big thing about that Inarritu had up front was that this film had to be one shot.
Oh,
I mean that was early on, and I told you he had a meeting with Mike Nichols or a dinner or something, and Mike Nichols was trying to talk him out of it, and because he didn't think it would produce the comedy that he wanted to produce, but he stuck with it. And although there's actually 16 cuts, you can't see them, or it's very difficult to see, but he wanted to give the impression that we were within his ego, that we were trapped or contained, or in this ego that is descending into this abyss,
world,
and he wanted us to feel that, and I think he did a good job of that.
Yes, the kind of claustrophobia of that.
Yeah, you do have a sense that you just want to get out of there. There are moments you just, I want to go out on the street. Oh, I didn't tell you, when I was in New York seeing To Kill a Mockingbird, I went by St. James Theater. I made my wife take a picture of me in front of St. James.
A true fanboy.
Oh my goodness! I'm going. This is great. She's going. What is it about? It's. I'll tell you later about it.
Yeah, that kind of that what do you call them? The viaducts underneath the alleyways.
The alleyways
that he has to walk through to get to Times Square, and that's wonderful. You're such a fanboy.
Yeah, but you're right. This we were right with him.
Yes,
right with him.
Yeah, we were in his head, and I think that's Michael Keaton. I think that's the brilliance of Michael Keaton. We feel his pain.
We feel his pain,
because we can relate to it. Everybody has that persecutor inside, that inner critic that drives us crazy.
Yeah. And the more we were with him, the more heated up the situation gets, the more heated up the vessel is, the more heated up, with frustration, humiliation, it's one humiliating thing after another. Like the image of the meteor, this heating up, right?
And I think the path to identify is both the humiliation and the desire for the redemption. The desire to work it through. Yeah, that we can feel too. He's driven, he's tortured by his insecurities, but he's so driven to redeem himself and have and feel and wanting to feel respected and validated in his acting ability. And so,
and one of the components of this redemption is that he didn't know what he was doing. Right? It's the unexpected virtue of ignorance. He was coming from the film world to theater, and there's something about him not knowing what to do, right? That contributed, right? That's like analysis. Part of it is the not knowing where we're headed, where we're going, and the analyst has to sit in that not knowing with the patient, so that because, and I think that's a big component of
Oh, yeah.
of his journey.
Of course. And, it's interesting when you say that, because it makes me think of how, as a film star, he had the ability, even though he was running out of money all the time, but he had his name, and ability to go to Broadway. This wasn't like a preview on off Broadway. This was Broadway.
You're right.
So that's an inflated part, right?
Yes.
So it's that inflated innocence that gets him into this predicament of being caught by all the insecurities, but driven to do it anyway. That's right. And not knowing where it's going to go.
That's a real good point. I hadn't thought about that this whole setup was an inflation by virtue of the fact that he had a name, and that was the only way that he would have gotten a play like this on Broadway with the backers. Yeah.
So interspersed in all this is how he's drawn to the Raymond Carver play, and how he's written a stage adaptation to it, which is all about what is the nature and true meaning of love. And I pulled out this, we know this quote from Jung. I love this quote from Jung in MDR. It's like page 353. And just let me read it, okay?
Yes, please.
Because it really addresses what I think Carver was, I have no idea, of course, but what Carver was going after, and what Regan is caught by wanting to understand more. So Jung says, but I falter before the task of finding the language which might adequately express the incalculable paradoxes of love. Eros is a cosmogonos, a creator and father-mother of all higher consciousness. In my medical experience, as well as in my own life, I have again and again been faced with the mystery of love and have never been able to explain what it is. Like Job, I had to, and this is a quote from Job, lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, I will not answer, and I will not answer.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful.
That from Jung. And I think that's what the film is about too. What
I think you're right.
is love, and because if it's about anima development and connecting with others and connecting with ourselves, that's the Eros that we all need and want.
And I think Carver, I think one of the reasons I fell in love with Carver is he, in a very brief way, in his short stories, took very difficult subjects and managed to work them. And his stories are all about imagery, to work them into symbols that find resolution. I think in this particular story, he was truly trying to get at, through his characters, what love was, and there was at least two different versions of love, right? There was the jealous husband that was willing to kill himself and failed at that, but was willing. And the character, the wife, that said, oh, he must love me. He was willing to. He's willing to die, right?
But he was threatening her too, right?
Threatening her, is willing to kill, right? And then the old couple in the hospital, right?
Yes.
That he couldn't see his wife.
Yes, the tenderness, right?
Yeah.
Well, the more Dan, the more I thought about this film, the more I watched it, I realized that what he's really, to me, what he's getting at with these two versions, like you say, of love, is to name the version of love that is active in patriarchal culture, which is to equate crazily love with violence. I was reminded in watching this film again of a quote by O.J. Simpson that he said years ago, and this is it. It was on my refrigerator for a long time because it was so knocked me out. He said, what if I had killed Nicole, his wife? It would mean that I really loved her.
Yeah.
And that is in the Carver story. And that is how love has been equated somehow, again, psychotically, with violence. Violence.
Yeah.
And it's all through the movie.
Yeah.
When is in an upcoming scene, when his ex-wife comes back to the dressing room, and she's worried about their daughter, and he says to her, "Remind me again why we broke up?" And she says, "Because you
threw a knife
at me, and an hour later you told me how much you love me."
Yeah.
That's an exact parallel of what's going on in the play.
Yes.
To the story.
Yes.
So in that way, the film is just brilliant, the way it parallels.
Yeah, and and so Regan is trying to get at the truth of love,
right? Right, for himself,
for himself.
Life. Through the play.
Yes, through the play, through the characters of the play, and each have their own story, but also having something to do with that theme of realness. Even Mike Shiner, right? He can only be real on stage, which is such a paradox, right? And all these characters are very interesting if we think of them as parts of Regan, right? As aspects of Regan,
right?
Mike Shiner would be what? Mike Shiner is a version of him, his arrogance, right? But also this sense of it really touched me when he defended Regan to the critic. Oh, we're jumping ahead. Do you remember that scene though? He says, in the bar. Well, tomorrow at the opening, he's going to put everything he is out there, and what are you going to be doing? To the critic, right?
Yeah. He uses it to kind of twist the knife in her.
Yeah.
He's defending Regan. Well, he's part of the show now, so maybe he's defending himself as well. But yeah.
Well, I think what he was respecting was Regan's attempt.
Yes, attempt. Right. He says something like that. He says you know who walk these floorboards, and you're doing, wow, that's a lot you're taking on, or something like that. Yeah. So the fact that he's chosen this story is highly relevant, right?
Yeah.
No doubt. So then we have the scene in the press interview in the dressing room is really funny, where the great line that one of the journalist says, that he quotes Roland Barthes and says, the cultural work of the past done by gods and epic sagas is now being done by laundry detergent commercials and comic strip characters. What a slam at Birdman, right? But still, and that's where Regan in that same scene mentions Icarus, which will be important later on, right? So he gets to say that no, he turned down Birdman again because he wants to do something more meaningful.
Yeah.
In life.
Yeah, that whole scene is interesting, and then the female reporter is reporting something that was it goes back to the quote that's on his mirror. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And that's attributed to who? Who's it? Joan Didier?
No, Susan Sontag.
Susan Sontag. That's right.
Yeah.
And what is it? A thing is a thing.
Is a thing, not what is said of the thing. That's such a great quote. That's got some reverberations there of, I mean, we could maybe that, Inaritu is probably like Hitchcock, that nothing is
wasted. Nothing is wasted.
Yeah, so that probably has some meaning about all the social media stuff that's going through naming things that aren't really the thing, or.
Well, it was played out in that scene because when she said something about, do you inject pig semen or something like that?
Yeah,
and he goes, where did she get that? She goes, I'll just say you deny it. Or he goes, no, why are you even talking about it? And somebody else says, oh yeah. And he says, no, why are you? It's like what he is not is simply thrown out there as if it's him. And now he has to defend himself because now it's in social media, and now it was so brief but so poignant to get his point across, right?
Yeah. Well, could we say it's like fake news, or all the ways in which we
yes. We're manipulated.
Manipulated, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
So then he goes from there.
Yeah. Preview. Yeah. Or practice.
Yes, on the stage.
Yeah. Yeah. I noted all the humiliations. That I got into a thing of wanting to note all the times that there's humiliation mentioned.
Yeah.
So soon after, I think he comes. Well, no, I'm jumping ahead just a little. Mm-hmm. Because so there's the practice. They're practicing their lines, and we should probably kind of skip over some of this stuff, Dan, because we're
taking time.
Yeah, we want to get to the
good stuff.
But there was a humiliation after the first preview when he comes off on stage. His producer friend says your zipper's down to Regan, having just walked off stage. Then there's the scene with the ex-wife, the very important scene in the dressing room where
something she says something to him. Do you remember what the?
Yeah, importantly, she says to him, "You confuse love with admiration."
Yeah.
Oh, that's so. Yeah, of course, that's what everybody is doing these days. They want, I think I told you earlier, I said validation in form of likes now is the new sex.
Yeah.
It's the new form of sex. So everyone wants to be admired and get their likes, and they're confusing it with love, real love.
Yeah.
So that was prescient and important line. And then these scenes with the critic, I think, are important because I had the thought, what do you think of her? She's like a female version of Birdman. She's so inflated. I'm going to ruin your play what I write, right?
Yeah.
It's something else.
And you pointed out that he brings his Raymond Carver cocktail napkin. That Raymond Carver signed after seeing him in a high school play, and said, thanks for an honest performance, something like that.
Right.
And you pointed out, which is interesting, when I saw it again, I said, oh, that's right. When he brings it to the critic to explain himself, she's not interested. Yeah. And she's, going to destroy the play. He leaves it there, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a later scene where he's at a crisis point. Okay. It's like after the second preview or something where he's really scared that he's going to fail. Mm-hmm. So he's given up. I think maybe at that point he's decided he's going to do the grand gesture. Listen, identifying so much with Birdman that he's caught by thinking he's not gonna make it,
and that's when he drinks. He goes out, he gets a bottle, he drinks, he wakes up, and then that's when he first flies, right? That's when he's on the roof and he's gonna jump and
it's so interesting, Dan, that what comes out so strongly. I didn't think I got this until, again, multiple viewings. His worst fear is humiliation. Mm-hmm. His worst fear. And clinically, don't you find that when you get to like, well, what then? What do we fear the most? Men and women, in my experience as a clinician, will say a fear of ridicule and humiliation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
we know by that quote, Nora Hall's quote,
love it.
To get through the labyrinth of life, we have to keep one hand on the cold, shuddering wall of humiliation, right? We know that's important. In my practice over time, over the years of practice, I'm acutely aware of when humiliation is there, and shame, and realizing the work that we're doing is arriving at a place where the person can feel it, right, and feel it in presence in the session, with the witness, in that container, and that's in its own time, right? That's
right, and survive it, because we're human, and this is what makes us human. There's a great book that a client turned me on to, that's apparently used in AA, or used in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. The title is The Spirituality of Imperfection. That kind of says it all. You know?
It does.
I mean, it's almost like we could say it's a spiritual practice.
Yes.
To honor the times that we're humiliated, but to get people there, it's with the ego, which Birdman is, supporting, is deflated ego, doesn't like to be stung and will resist that, and that's what we see in the film. He's constantly resisting that humiliation, and yet he's constantly, the more he's
constantly pursuing it. That's the trickster, right? The trickster really gets us in touch with our humiliation.
It's the trickster. It is. Just beware, be careful what you speak of or fear, it'll grab you. Yeah.
And the humiliation is, the root word is humus.
Yes.
HUMUS, and it means earth, fertile soil, fertile soil, right?
Fertile. Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful image because it's, the image of the meteor coming down to earth, and the fecundity,
right,
of this place,
right,
of this the venue of this theater, the venue of this play. There's this idea of the ritual that we offer. We have to offer ourselves to this process of humility, because initiation, right, has a humiliating component to it, doesn't it? It has it gets us in touch with our shame.
Right. It brings us down to earth.
It brings us down to
earth.
And
it's like one analyst once said to me years ago, shit is fertilizer.
Yes.
And interestingly, which had never occurred to me except for after multiple viewings, is that with the play, the scene acted out 3 times in the film. The scene in the hotel 3 times, and the scene that's acted out that he adapts is only spoken about in the play.
Yeah.
So Eddie, this character, this ex-husband of one of the characters who wrecks all this violence, is not a character at the kitchen.
Not in the story.
Is not.
Yeah, it's not in
only
the story.
Talked about.
Yes.
So Regan creates Eddie, a whole scene around Eddie. Yeah. So he completely identifies with Eddie, right?
It's a really good point.
Yeah, it's just so
as if he has to work this through because he threw a kitchen knife at his wife. Right. He has to work through this character.
Yeah.
That's within him. That what is this love? Is this does he have to arrive at that moment of complete humiliation when he's told he's not loved, right? Which is really what that scene's about.
Right. It is told that he's not loved. And also, I would say, Dan, that I think the crux for me is the words to that last scene, which is, I just want you to love me. I just want to be loved. I've tried to want you to love me. So, and the play ends there with his, bungled attempted suicide. And so to me, that what we're witnessing there is his complete, not only humiliation, but his ability to be vulnerable, needy, and show how dependent he is on the other. He wants to be loved. He wants to feel beloved.
Yes.
So I think this is, to me, this is the great secret in our culture, that men, I'm generalizing here, of course, men have great difficulty acknowledging their dependency needs.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. They deny them, and then they turn violent.
Yeah.
They turn violent. If men can't acknowledge they need others, and they are risking that, then that's not love.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the play in the movie was such a success. That he's completely stripped bare and says these lines to the audience. And like I said, I had not seen that on the first 3, 4, 5 viewings of the film. It just clicked in.
That's very interesting to think about that. Yeah. And we've talked about that before, the difference working with men is around their ability to feel to live out their dependency needs, right?
Right. I think it came up in Rear Window. I think you brought it up in Rear Window. That's.
Yeah, we talked about this idea of him shooting off his nose, which is such an interesting change in the story, right? So he shoots his nose off in the movie, and so the saying that came up for me, the adage, it really has historical origins, is to cut off one's nose to spite one's face.
Yes.
And the meaning or one of the meanings they came up with is when you try to hurt somebody, you're actually hurting yourself. Right? When it's my idea about the revenge fantasy. When I try to suss out, often when there's a humiliation, when there's shame, when there's betrayal, that there's a perpetual revenge fantasy that people carry around, right? And it never gets them to the mourning that they need to do until they can't, right? But they carry the revenge fantasy. It's almost as if this image of shooting one's nose off was hurting somebody, which is the revenge fantasy. To spite oneself, right? Because in the end, you're really hurting yourself, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. That's a great point. You know who writes about spite really well is Sylvia Pereira in her book, The Scapegoat Complex. She says that when we spite, we deny our own needs.
Yes. Okay.
So that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I also, when you mentioned that to me, I also thought of the whole adage or cliche of looking down your nose at someone else. And that also signifies a kind of inflation. Yeah. Inflation. So if he shot off his nose, he can't do that anymore.
Can't look down at. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think they're both relevant. Yeah, and also that last scene in the hospital with the where his face is bandaged because he had attempted shooting off. That to me also mirrors the story in the play of the couple, of the man in bandages and wanting to see his wife through the eye holes.
That's right. That's right.
Isn't that?
I didn't connect that.
Isn't that a beautiful parallel?
That is beautiful.
His face, and he's looking at his wife, his wife and his daughter Regan in the hospital bed.
Yeah.
I thought that was a beautiful echo.
You're right, because the script, the movie script, really makes a point, and in the play, that the character is talking about going to this husband and talking, with his mouth hole and his eye holes, and he was trying to understand him, and he was trying to, understand where, why the husband was suffering, and what it's so interesting. The other image that I read a review that connected that face covering, that bandage, mirrored the mask that the Birdman was wearing.
Okay.
Which is a great idea, because what happens at the end, he integrates the Birdman, right? And maybe he owns, I don't know, how would you describe that? He's been transformed, and now the Birdman is just he's just sitting on the toilet.
Sitting on the toilet. What a way to end. I would say I understand what you're saying. I would say there's a certain level of integration.
Okay.
But also, if it's an archetypal defense, like Kalshed says, this persecutory part, it can't, there's a certain amount of it that cannot be integrated.
Right.
So Regan, under his breath, says to Birdman on the toilet, bye-bye, fuck you. So I think saying no to that part is a huge thing that we can do in our own lives, to, that inner critic.
Yes.
Saying no. A certain amount of integration, that it recedes in power. It doesn't stop us from moving on in our lives.
Yeah.
But I think a certain amount doesn't get integrated. It's all, given the right set of circumstances, it comes back. It can get triggered again. But,
another way of thinking about it, which might make more sense, is that the archetype is mediated. It comes into the real, and so he could say no to the archetype, right? He could say, no, that's not me.
Yes.
But at the same time, he's been transformed by the archetypal energy. Yeah.
That's right. There's no question he's been transformed. That's what's so satisfying about this movie.
Yeah.
That there is a progression and a growth and redemption in how he interacts with his daughter. And the unexpected virtue of ignorance that he can.
And you and I talked about, and we're on the same page regarding, the scene which apparently, people were unclear about, when she's looks down and then looks up, that this is a metaphor for their transformation, right? This is not him flying around. This is, and that he is, there's something about the daughter, Sam, in terms of she needed him to be something. She, this idea that parents project onto their children their individuation needs, right?
For
and expect the children to individuate in ways that, the unlived life, right?
Right.
And she needed him to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even as she's telling him not to, right? Even if she's wondering, why are you doing this?
Important. Yeah.
You're not so. I mean, when she says to him, very articulately and very beautifully acted, "You're not important. Yeah. We're not important."
Yeah.
He that scene was so pointed. He really had to hear that, and it seemed like he really took that in.
Right.
Right. That was the counter. Measure to his inflation.
Yes. She was mediating his inflation then. Right. Yeah. What was the scene you cried at, Dan?
Oh, the scene with the wife, when it was the opening, and he was laying in his dressing room. It was mid at intermission,
right?
And she comes in, and he just bears his soul, and that's the scene where he tells her, the night they had this party, and he's having sex with somebody from the party, and she threw everybody out, and And he tells her, that he tried to kill himself. He went into the ocean, and then he gets attacked by all these jellyfish.
Yes.
But then he says, I wish I didn't film Sam's birth. That's the point.
Yes. I was not present in my life.
I was not present. And I just broke down.
Oh, wow.
Because they're just, watching the entire film. And at that moment, for him to own. Really own and be able to express that he was not, and to really feel that regret. You're feeling it now. I can see it. It's the audience. Oh my goodness.
The viewers don't know that. The listeners don't know that, rather, but you're reliving that.
Well, and part of my work, in hospice has been to deal with people at the end of life, in which this what they're either dealing with or not dealing with, but is coming up in either case are their regrets. You know what I'm saying? And it gives them the opportunity to become real in those moments when we can accept our human failings, accept for Reagan, he failed at his marriage. He failed at being a father, but his redemption is in that moment, owning all that. Right. And it's like, he did this not only for himself, but for his daughter, who at the end of the film can experience him differently. And there's something he finishes that she needed him to finish. Does that make sense?
Right. That's beautiful, because that reminds me of the scene with Mike, where Mike says to her, "What was so bad about what your father did to you? Why do you hate him so much, or something? Why are you angry?" And she says, "Well, he tried to make up for not being there by telling me I was special." And so there's this inflation that she's rejecting.
Yeah.
Right? She's rejecting that kind of maladaptive inflation.
Yes.
We say.
Yes.
Maladaptive grandiosity. And that's beautiful, Dan, that it's like what we try to do. We try to heal our parents so that they can be there for us.
Yeah.
So she also needed him to work this through.
She did. There was a stuckness in her, which is very interesting. This, why is she here? I mean, what is her life about? Well, she's stuck here at this theater with this play, with this job, and she needs to move on. She doesn't know how to move on, and her relationship with her father is important for her moving on, right? Yes. In some way, and it's just so beautifully rendered.
Yes, that last scene, which I think I told you I read that it came to Inaritu in a dream. It's exactly, I agree. I don't know why people don't see that. They want something concrete. They don't get that it's a metaphor. It's what his body experienced with his daughter, that he's flying. Dreams about flying are not necessarily inflated dreams. They're freedom.
Right.
They're freedom and love. And so it's such a gorgeous ending that they could both laugh and smile together.
Yes. And you can hear the laughter, right?
Yeah. The screen goes blank, but you can hear her laughing and laughing. It's gorgeous.
I downloaded the script. Now, I know the scripts that are out there could be various versions of them, but the script had an interesting, had that ending, but it had an interesting little twist, because when she comes in to see him in the hospital room, she's carrying lilacs. She offers him lilacs.
Yes.
In the movie script, it was the Alchemylas that she didn't get him the first time, which is interesting to think about. I thought lilacs were perfectly appropriate because it's an image of spring and renewal. Right? But to, at least in one iteration, he was imagining that she would actually bring the flowers that he originally wanted is
Yes.
also would be interesting, right?
Yes, but you know what? It makes me think that maybe with all that feminine imagery of that flower, the Alchemy, maybe he doesn't need the symbol anymore. He's got the real relationship with his daughter.
Yeah.
And the spring flowers of renewal is maybe more, I don't know, more appropriate. It's an interesting change, though, symbolically. Wow. Well, I've told you before this that the phrase when we talked about trying to name what's healing for this, I think we captured what's healing for this movie, for this film, why we wanted to do a podcast on it. And I told you the phrase that I had come upon, which is the beneficence of humiliation, of humility, the beneficence of humility.
I love that. I love that.
It's a gorgeous phrase. And I would say for me too, the whole idea of wounded masculinity is really important in this film, to show that.
And that's a theme throughout Inarritu's movies. I was thinking back to Beautiful with Javier Bardem, and to Revenant. All films having to do with death too. In Beautiful, he's dying of cancer. In this film, it's thinking about suicide. In The Revenant, he is almost died by the bear mauling. So death and humiliation are in the same realm.
Right. Well, you mentioned before, like the whole death and rebirth theme in Alchemy. Initiatory experiences can have that component, right? I think you mentioned that earlier. Well,
is there anything else?
No, I don't think so. This whole in my notes, I had noted this whole idea between the difference that Winnicott talks about, the differences between fantasy and imagination. And I think Jung would agree that imagination is more, in his view, what's the great phrase he uses in volume 6? It shows here's this great word, I can't think of it right now, but it's something like he sketches out a line of future development, and so his whole technique of active imagination, whereas fantasy is more like a self-soothing, escapist, avoiding reality and real suffering. And Regan, we see, gets from fantasy to imagination, and I
think that's a good point. That's a real good point. And I think fantasy comes more from the unconscious, and imagination is the ego reaching in to the unconscious. I think it's coming at it from a different direction, because so much of our life is filled with fantasies, and fantasies that are affecting us that we're not even conscious of. Right?
Yeah.
And trying to get at those fantasies is important, but it is imagination, right? How often do you find yourself in a dialogue with a patient that, so let's imagine such and such, and let's go there, right? And that's so fruitful. It's like,
right.
Wow,
it's grounded. It too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Hopefully more grounded, right?
Yeah.
Well.
There's one more phrase that Inarritu uses that he said somebody else came up. This was in an interview. I think it goes back to the statement on the mirror. A thing is a thing, not with and this says, he was talking about the word water. This is the statement: the word water will not wet you.
Will not wet you. The word,
word water will not wet you. And he was using that to describe, when he puts in a script, that like in the Revenant, the Indians attack, right? He just puts he goes, whenever he does something like that, he wreaks havoc on a set with all of the people that have to make a film, because then it's just, he's just using the word water. Now it's up to everybody to come up with the wetness of it, right?
Yeah.
When he puts in something in a script, he goes, you have to follow through. Now in this film, he makes a great point of saying he had to, which he admires all the actors that did it, everything had to be completely choreographed down to the second, because they have to move from one spot. They actually had painted lines.
Wow.
They would have to move from one spot to another in a particular time. Wow. Because remember, everything was a continuous
shot.
Continuous shot.
Yeah,
so, when somebody was walking in or something was happening, they couldn't break. They couldn't break for it. It had to be continued. So all of these actors they actually had people that were hired to act it out and step it out before they brought the actors in. And then they had to, it was completely choreographed.
Yeah.
Which is just so interesting. And they really went through it.
Yeah, but somehow that formal structure or something really allowed for you to enter.
Isn't that something?
The action, where it didn't dampen it down at all.
It didn't dampen it down.
Oh, interesting. But yeah, it's the quality of, the attack or the relationship, or it's not, they kiss. Well, how are they kissing? I mean, you have to flesh it out.
That's right.
Oh, this was great fun, Dan. This film is just so brilliant. I hope people see it and see it in other ways than we saw it, and it's so rich. I
hope so too. So everybody, go, if you haven't seen it, go see it. If you did see it, go see it again.
That's right. I certainly will.
Yeah.
I'm not done with this film. It has stayed with me. I have to say that the last couple of times I've seen it, it puts me in a place of honoring humility.
Yes. Yeah.
It shifts something in me.
Yeah.
And that's the power of film.
Wow.
That's what makes it healing.
Wow. I think that's well put. And I think, my being able to laugh and cry after multiple viewings speaks to the something was moved in me. Something allowed me to get into my body, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Out of my head into my body, and the film facilitated that.
Right. That's beautifully put too. Wow.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. I love these times together that we have. It's just so exciting, so meaningful.
Me too. A lot of energy between us. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, archives, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2021 donors who gave at the contributing member level or above: the Arlene M. Feiner Trust, Barbara Annan, Arlo and Rena Compaan, Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Dougherty, Carl and Patricia Greer, Ryan Maher, Patricia Martin, Boris Matthews, Sue Rosenthal, Dyane Sherwood, Debbie Stutsman, Lawrence Chad Tingley, Alexander Wayne and Lynne Copp, Gerald Weiner, and Ellen Young. You can also become a supporter of this podcast by visiting our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks.